Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. And we're recording today on June 21st. Yes, that is a weekend, and yes, that is Father's Day for many people. But Cliff and I had a lot of stuff going on this week, both with family and friends. And so we carved out a little bit of time over the weekend to try and get our recording done today. And so we'll be bringing you some news about this week and next week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research advisory firm. And joining me today for the conversation is our co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome on this beautiful, sunny, very hot and warm day. I don't know about for you in Florida, but here in
Well, you've got the fire going.
We do.
You got the fire going in your hobbit hole.
I got my hobbit
I'm
hole.
up in the high rise.
Mary, it's a weekend.
That's right.
I'm just getting off a vacation because me and my family did a big long trip with 4 generations, including my dad, through the Smoky Mountains, through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that's been fun. And we spent a lot of time in Airbnbs that didn't quite look like this, but we tried to get as close to this. And I'm dressed in my weekend gear of t-shirts. No one fights alone. And you, I think, are at family's house watching soccer this weekend, right?
That's right. We got the World Cup. We got Father's Day. We've got a Sunday, but it doesn't mean that the HR tech world stops for us. It keeps going, and we.
I'm not drinking at all, but it's going to be. I've got tea in my drinking, but it's going to be. I think we're going to be getting through today.
Yeah, it's not a big long one. We may have mentioned on the show before, but the reason that there's so much travel in the spring and then again in the fall is because that's generally when product announcements are made, right? So that is just the life cycle of a lot of global tech. There are 2 major sort of release windows, 2 major update spaces. It's also when a lot of the M&A activity takes place. And so the reason why the travel is slowed down is because people are going back. They've made big releases. Most of those have come out now. So that will also be reflected, and you'll see there's not as much. It's not as hectic. I think, we had that 2-hour episode not too long ago because there was just so much, right? But we still have some big moves.
Some things going on. And I think, this is the time when a lot of people take vacations. This is the time we kind of start to slow down with the holidays, right, through the summer, particularly as you get into July. But probably the most important news, Cliff, before we get into any other update news, is you have maybe 2 days when this comes out before the entire survey closes this year for the annual HR system survey. So if you don't want to pay the $1,800 to get access to that full report that gets launched in October, which is over 300 pages. And if you are interested at all in understanding things like how to build an HR system strategy and what's going on in the AI and HR tech space and what vendors are actually being utilized by your peers and cohorts, you want a little mini benchmarking environment, and you want to do a track of your own HR tech ecosystem, because that's what that survey does for you, because it asks about all your areas. So you get a little bit of historical data. I know some people who have shown me their responses back for 20 years, Cliff. I used to have someone who had 20 years of responses in a folder, and he said, this is how I track what HR tech I use. And he was amazing. I loved him. But what we do know is that by the time this comes out, there will only be a little bit of time left to take it. If you get it started before a certain date, you have a few more days because I know it's going to say it's going to be closed on June 24th. If you can get yourself in there and get it started, you'll get a few more extra days to close it, because we do give you some time to finish things off. So please spend some time. We know it is a lot of work. We promise you that it is well worth it. And we will make sure that there's a link with the posting when the first posting comes out. Right?
Yep, absolutely. And there's also, I want to point out, we've mentioned before, but there's a big finance section too. So you might say, well, I don't really work in HR. My company's small. None of that matters. Coming out. And also, I know we said summer, but we also have a lot of APAC friends, a lot of Latin American friends. It's winter for you. We understand that. Still, if you watch the video feed of this, which you can see on YouTube or on the hrchannel.com, we've got the cozy fire that stays.
Yes. For those of you who have a little bit colder weather right now. Yes. Yeah. We are Yeah, it is interesting because we not only do we have finance, and I was surprised. I did not think we would have as many responses, but I went in and looked. There's a lot of finance responses. So we're going to have some good finance data. And the finance data goes hand in hand with the HR data. We're talking about AI. What big enterprise applications are you using, and how is that impacting the finance space, and then how it connects to HR? So those two worlds are doing a lot of overlapping right now. We also added compliance this year. So there's a lot of data and insights on compliance and a compliance vendor section, which is sort of interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about one of the compliance vendors today, Brightmind, because they have some upcoming news. But we have a lot of other organizations like MeterCheck, as well as the large Equifax and Experian, who are all kind of in that compliance space right now. And we know people are using them at different levels. And so we are very interested in seeing which ones are you using, what's your user experience and vendor satisfaction on them. So it's a good point to do that. I think the other thing that we added a little bit more of is we added more questions about the outcomes you're receiving from HR tech and AI, both of them. We've always had a series of business outcomes that we've tracked in the research that we always go back to. But this time we're asking you some pointed questions about the things you feel you are getting, the kind of metrics you're tracking that you're actually using for individual HR tech areas. That was the one area I'm excited about, Cliff, because we've always done it sort of on the back end. This time we're also getting the front end to see if they match based off what we're seeing, right?
Yeah, I do really like that. And I think that the outcome discussion, it's, it's always interesting, right? Because we try not to go too overboard about, I was about to say, we don't go too overboard about how we sort of use this data to predict the future, but actually we do make a big deal out of it.
We did pretty good predictions last year, like really big predictions, like hiring and total labor market numbers. They actually were almost on track, right?
Yeah, but some stuff that there's no way we could have predicted this, but it is interesting that outcomes discussion, something we've talked about forever, has become so much a part of just general HR business speak now because of the AI thing, right? Especially as we're seeing things that have just started to come into the market, like outcome-based pricing. You'll sometimes hear this also as value-based pricing. We might have touched on an episode before, but the idea here, and you'll probably hear more of this, is companies saying, okay, we understand that there's too much unpredictability around usage-based pricing for AI, right? So what if we do a system where we say, okay, last year you using the same sort of resource in the same time frame, you had 10 hires, and by using our system powered by AI, you now have 20 hires. That's a savings of, let's say, according to your own metrics, 50 grand, we will get 10%. Or whatever the case might be. It would be based on the outcomes that you receive. So this idea of outcomes-based valuations has become just part, it's just something you're going to hear lots about if you're not already hearing that. And it is funny that is how our report has been framed for decades. So
it's been framed for decades. And there's been industries too. Like my late husband for many years used to run a manufacturing technology that he used to work at that would go into the company and figure out what pieces and parts you needed to keep in stock to keep your manufacturing running. And what they would find is oftentimes they had like years and years of turns and pistons or whatever that never went bad. And they were able to either sell those or figure out that you don't need to reorder that. And they would figure out sort of the optimal amount of stock you need to have in place. And they would base all the cost of that off of the percentage they would save from that, right? So instead of charging you up front, they would go in and do the analysis. And they'd say, if you do this, you're going to save X amount over these next 5 years, as well as you're going to sell this much and save this amount. And they would get a percentage of that. So this is not a new concept. That was 15 years ago when he was doing that. I think, what's coming out is this is the first time we started to say we can actually have those kind of calculations on the people front as well, right? Moving away from the per employee and the PEPM. It is a bit harder when we're talking about AI with outcomes of, is it the dashboard? Is it the actual performance you're looking for? Is it the reduction in time? Because every time you run a dashboard, you might be charged. So we're going to get into that a little bit with pricing and conversations today. That is one of the things I think the market's really struggling with, which is if I'm doing outcome-based pricing, which is where I think everybody wants to land because it feels more comfortable and we could show some value from it, what is the outcome that we are basing that off of, right? So that's the big conversation right now. Yeah.
It might actually be a good segue, if I could, talk about something that I saw this last week at the PrismHR Live event. So if you don't know, PrismHR, that also includes, they bought Namely a while back, that, Venture as the sort of parent company, but also as their direct sales. They're the most acquisitive. We've definitely mentioned them before because I think they had something like 105 acquisitions in the last 365 days. I made a joke when I was there. I was like, so did you guys buy anyone in the last couple of days while I was here? I need to know about. And they laughed and they go, not this week. So, and I don't think they were joking about that. But, their model has largely been they work with PEOs, right? Professional employer organization, and other versions of that where they go to them and they give them the software they need. Now, they are not as, I always forget which one is bullish, the one where you're positive towards it. They're not as bullish on AI that we've seen from a lot of other organizations because they already, because of their unique situation in terms of going directly to PEOs, they've always kind of been like, it needs to prove its value first, right? Because they're selling to someone who's selling to someone, right? In a sense, right? So they're like, yeah, the AI capabilities are interesting. Their CEO, Alex Campos, said, he's like, I'm not that impressed by AI capabilities. I am very impressed by the way people are using those AI capabilities, coming up with new interesting uses. So we're not looking at a usage-based model, but the outcome-based model is interesting, but it's kind of the space we've already been in, right?
Yeah.
So, we've got to figure out very much the voice of the customer. They were very, they've always liked our model of going directly to that because that's how they see it too. It's a lot of small businesses too, right? But the big news there, speaking of that, is that through one of those acquisitions, primarily Listo, they have become a global player. They used to be United States only, or at least US and Canada.
Yeah.
And their big announcement, they kind of had two. Like it started off with this Prism Intelligence, which is the data layer that connects everything because of all the different systems that they have, everything from, executive pay to performance management, bringing that all together requires a data layer, something we've seen with Sana from Workday and a few others, right? That is what they're calling Pi for Prism Intelligence. And then they sort of almost like shadow dropped that they're going global, but it was just as important, if not more important, I think, because that allows small businesses through ICPs. In this case, we mean ICP is an in-country presence,
Yes.
not an ideal customer profile. Detroit Rap Group, which is another ICP. We don't talk about them as much here, but yeah, so to that, they have 80 to 90 countries that they can serve now, even for the smallest of organizations.
So when you say serving, make sure I understand, because that's actually pretty big news, because it's really tough to go international when you've been US only. But they picked up Callisto, which is an international. Is it HRMS payroll? Is it just the kind of the serving of what is not EORs internationally, but probably more, or not PEOs internationally, but EORs
more
internationally.
EORs, right? That's correct. Yeah. Employer record. Yeah, that's exactly it. So they were able to use their systems, which would primarily probably be payroll, although they do have their software. But in order to comply with all the local regulations, whether that be from the physical software side or any of the regulatory nature of data movement, and of course through payment, that's probably the biggest key, and any of that sort of work that has to be done, they have an in-country presence, meaning that they automatically, would work through them to comply with any of the regulatory nature. So it would be, as far as the user side, they probably wouldn't notice much, but there would be that sort of extra layer through those in-country presences they have now to make sure that they're compliant. The example that I used and we talked through was like, I have a friend who is in Mauritius and he works for a French company as an American citizen who is in Mauritius, right? And there's French rules about any payment has to come through a French bank. So the way it used to work is the money would have to be wired to the French bank, which would then have to be sent to him. You can only imagine the delay that caused him as an employee of receiving his pay. If instead you're working through an in-country presence, that presence already is compliant. The money can now just go directly to them and you can get paid immediately.
Which makes a huge difference for people when you're trying to make that decision about where payroll. We've got a small client that we're working with right now who's working on those kind of decisions. And, we still think probably one of the biggest complex things that we hear in our data set over and over again is global payroll issues, right?
Absolutely. And that's pretty wild for they're serving very small businesses in some cases. So to give them those capabilities, I think is pretty neat. And it was nice to be able to see it too. And nice to be chat with a few of our friends at Poster Elite was there. And I think Equifax and a few others that, really serve those small businesses with some capabilities that would be kind of almost unthinkable 10 years ago, in terms of what was out there in terms of benefit offerings and global offerings and all that sort of stuff. So really neat to see.
Well, and then, so you went to I think it was the only event that we went to. I know I had talked about Dayforce in our last one. You had talked about the SAP event. Both of us were sort of just off those in our last thing. But we do have a couple of webinars coming up as well, right? You're going to be doing a webinar for the Australia audience with Hi Bob coming up, correct?
Yep, that one has been recorded. You can now watch that as a recording. So if you take a look at that, although it is for a APAC audience and was recorded when we did a live in Australian time, you no longer have to be, up at, 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, which you would have had done to get a live. You can go over to HiBob and check that recording. Very interesting stuff. And although, again, the breakdown is for the Asia Pacific, I often reference what that looks like against the overall numbers. So you can kind of see, is there some differences that might just be interesting either way? You had a couple really interesting ADP ones. I love one of the topics is the women at work.
Yeah, that one's out there and it's been recorded, but I think it's always great to go in and see that was their women at work. And that was not just me, but they did a whole day's worth of content and information, which is still very valid, I think, for everybody. And it's not about women at work. It is about the work being done and how women are interacting with it. I think that's probably the most important thing there, is that it's a conversation about the experiences that we're having and the things that are not going well right now, right? And how to address that. The other one that we just got done that should be in there, that is going to be on the ADP site and on our website, well, I think we'll have it in our next newsletter, is we did HR and IT talking about how those functions working together. Steve McDonald was in there with me, co-hosted it with me, along with the chief product and IT director for ADP. We were really excited to have a conversation about some real things, like how do you deal with onboarding and making sure people have the right technology as well as the right processes and tools they needed for onboarding, right? We definitely spent some time talking about when you offboard, the compliance around that and how you ensure that IT, HR, technology kind of work together. And then how these two worlds are working together in the AI space, right? And how they need each other. And I know we've talked a lot about that. That isn't the first time we've had that conversation. What I really liked about this session was we were talking about it from the context of a lot of times very small businesses, because I think that's a big business conversation a lot of times, right? And I think when we talk about it in small business terms, we're kind of like, well, do they even have an IT director? Well, they do generally. They have someone that they're doing IT with, and someone who's handling that. And then they also have someone who is handling the HR decisions. And oftentimes those two, because they're so small, don't get connected as well as they should. And so there was a really good conversation about just how to marry those two worlds up a little bit better. The other thing that's coming up here, which will be just at about the time we wrap, is that we will be doing a webinar with Workday. I'll be with Christina Golt, who is their head of product general manager over there for payroll and workforce management. She's been a longtime friend of mine over at Workday because she has just been through a lot of the areas on product leadership and product ownership in the Workday space. She really gets HR and what HR is trying to accomplish and a lot of the risks and challenges with HR. She's been a driving force behind some of the things that Workday's tool can do at the very complex level of configuration, because she knows what organizations need at that level. We're going to be talking about workforce management, and particularly workforce management and how that is becoming sort of the new business technology. One of the things I tell people all the time, and I've said this, I think, Cliff, since you've known me, because my background comes from working on a practitioner side with retail and frontline workers, people do not often give the respect to workforce management or time management, depending on where you know how big or small you are, technology, that they probably should, because it's oftentimes an operation system or it's kind of a side note to all the other HR practice and technology tools that we have. But when we're talking about AI and we're looking at the actual performance, the actual work on the ground, all that data sitting inside your workforce management system. And so we're going to be talking about how we think about not just workforce management, but absence and labor scheduling, what that means for organizations, time and attendance. And we're talking about optimization of their workforce in a positive way, which I think oftentimes it gets kind of negatively. And then what the difference is with labor budgeting, because that's a whole other conversation that connects with the finance team. So it's going to be a great conversation. Christine and I are going to get into some depth there. We will highlight some of the things that Workday has done, because I think that's an important conversation to have for each of the vendors. You should be looking at what have they done differently, uniquely in this space. And then the other thing we should probably highlight is that although you and I didn't go to SHRM, we did have one of our members, Susan Richards, who is one of our founders. She went to SHRM this week, so you might have seen her there, dropped in. I think she said she talked to a couple of our customers and she talked to a couple practitioners. And we do know that's probably the biggest news this week that's coming out. There's been a lot of commentary on SHRM. We'll get some updates from her and maybe get some comments on that in the next podcast. So
yeah, looking forward to that. We'll shine some light on that, which is my clumsy segue into the first story, which is about a new company, a new platform, I should say, and I guess company as well. Sol, S-O-L is in the Spanish word for sun. That will be a new AI native HRS, completely developed with AI both at its core and in its usage. What's interesting about this, and which I think makes it worthy of us being talked about, is who exactly created this? Who is the people behind it? This is Pete Schlamp, Aaron Yang, Jim Stratton, John Ruggiero, all former, I believe, Workday executives.
Almost all former Workday. There's a couple of other roles in there, but most of that is from Workday. And most of them I know fairly well from my early days of working with Workday as one of the early analysts who were kind of covering that space, even before people were, the big Workday bandwagon on some sense for a lot of the buyers. It was before they had a lot of customers. Pete Schlamp had been around a long time, really strong in analytics and planning. He was one of the founding members of some of the tools that they acquired in that space, and really had, I think, a good sort of product and knowledge of how data functioned inside organizations. Jim Stratton, who's one of my favorites, I will have to say, and I only say this because he was he's an IT infrastructure guy, right? Like, he was the guy who understood the technology at the base of how things ran, right? Servers, connections, those kind of things, APIs. But he asked the best customer questions when I was in the room with him and Anil and the rest of the executive board. Like, he always would stop and say, let's listen to what Stacey's saying about, what we're challenged with and what our customers are struggling with. Because he realized, I think, at a lot of levels that, a lot of the customer challenges weren't oftentimes about the product processes. It wasn't as much about sort of what the front end looked like. It was oftentimes something that had to do with sort of how the back end worked and how things were connected. So I'm very excited. Eric Yang has been in there a long time, also worked under Jim Stratton's team. A lot of good people with, I think, some strong technical background. Now, their focus, it sounds like with Soul, is that they are going to create an AI-first HRMS environment. We're hearing this a lot in the whole market. I'm very interested in seeing, we haven't got a briefing yet, but we will definitely get a briefing from them. They just came out of stealth mode, as they call it, right? What I do think is that they're not the only, I could say, Workday kind of, how do you best put this, group of people who have spun things off, right? Is a good way to put it. There's another one out there. I don't have the name of it, where I'm actually trying to get some details on that one as well. We do know that I talked about the new one that's being built on the ServiceNow platform, Noralex, right, which is really exciting. We're kind of seeing where that's going. This whole space, I think everybody is trying to reimagine what the HRMS is, and they're trying to reimagine it from different views and different perspectives. I'm excited to see this because I think it gives competition to what is the traditional HRMS standard. Now, we've talked for quite some time that it isn't the HRMS is the system of record on a lot of systems, and that data is needed, and all the security and all of the policies and all the things that go around is important. But a lot of that can be held in other systems too, right? This is why ServiceNow has become such a big front end technology for a lot of organizations. This is why we're seeing organizations like Cornerstone create what we consider like a light HRMS, because their talent management covers a lot of that profile information, right? And for big European countries who oftentimes have companies who oftentimes have lots of different payrolls, they just need that layer above, and the payroll holds a lot of that data, right? So I think everybody's trying to figure their way through this. The HRMS was something that was created by, to some extent, in the system of record by the HR technologist who said, I need some place to hold all this information, right? Now, will AI make that a little less valuable to hold it all in one place? Doesn't make the data any less valuable. The question is where it's held that becomes the big conversation, right?
Yeah. For a certain age listener, I know that obviously when I started as a practitioner, same as you did, we were in the computer age, but we still had regulations about where all files had to be kept in a fireproof file cabinet.
Yes.
And that was, everything from your I-9 to any of your, personal information, emergency contact, all that. That's really the digital version of that is what HRMS is that old fireproof file cabinet. So anything sort of compliance regulated, regulatory related, any of the info that you need. But you're right. And the necessity of that system has gone beyond like, okay, I just need to have all that in a record too. I specifically can use this in a positive way to help create broader insights into our data and use that to help our workers and our company ultimately.
Yeah. And as we've got, one of the things I'm going to talk about in the Workday webinar that I'm doing is this path we've seen happen, which in on-premise, we were managing our processes. We were really trying to figure out how to get processes into a technology with all that data that you talked about. When we went to the cloud, it was really trying to kind of do best practices, kind of all the things that were the same, that were important. When we did big data, it was about understanding all the data that we had and making that accessible, right? There was all these stages that we've gone through in technology. That's summarizing at a very high level. But the difference with AI that we are seeing right now is it is about how we manage the work. And I think that's what makes it a very different conversation, which is it has to have access to where the work is being done, to the data about the work, not just all the information about who's doing the work and what their skills are and their capabilities, which is what we've been spending a lot of time on, and the flow of getting that information to where it needs to be. When you start talking about how the work gets done, those systems become more operations and less data keeping. And this is why you're starting to see all these organizations rethink the idea of it. So very exciting to see where it heads.
Absolutely. So you mentioned too that SHRM was going on at the same time that I was at PrismHR Live. There was actually another event, not as big in terms of people, but there's always some major announcement comes out, and that's iSolve's Partner Connect.
Yeah.
Was happening. Definitely that was FOMO for me because, I was there last year and spoke there last year, and it just so much of so many different things are happening at the same time. I was like,
Yeah.
I really considered, can I make the flight out there and then to Orlando?
Yeah.
And luckily, like I said, Susan was there, but kind of a bummer. But there was some big news that came out of that they were kind enough to pass on. And that was two kind of main things, their workforce capital management platform. But
Yeah.
I'd say the bigger one, or at least the one that they sort of highlight, is that they have a Claude connector, right? So Anthropic, the company that makes Claude.
Yeah.
I know that this is definitely one, I guess I would call it the practitioner side, what I really see the value, because we here at Sapient Insights Group have found from reviewing all of these connections and all these AI agents type work, that we found Claude to be useful when it has that direct connection, when we can have it directly in an Excel sheet, for instance, and say, based on the calculations we have here, can you create the formulas? Can you populate, these cells? Given the example we've shown, strange enough, Microsoft's Copilot, at least at the levels that we were using it at, didn't have those connections, even though they're like products, but whatever.
Right.
So
Yeah.
be able to have that embedded into your work. So that's what this Cloud Connector is. It's within the iSolve platform. So you could say, hey, search through any of these fields and see if I'm missing some information. If we're going to use this sort of HR system of record example, continuing through and say, oh, wow, I don't have the I-9 information for 6 employees. That's now been flagged rather than having to do that manually. You can use natural language to run those queries. So I find that in the space of the work, Cloud Connector to be worthy of a big announcement. And that's pretty cool.
Well, and they also, I think, released some agents as well, right? I think they had a number of agents. They put out some payroll, some clients, a couple of other ones. And again, the one thing that's interesting about iSolved, because we show a chart every year about the organizations who say they are aware of and using AI inside of your HR applications, which is different than if I'm an HR organization who's using any form of AI and I'm also using we kind of look at it both ways. We look at, am I using standalone AI and other things, and am I not using your AI? Because that's an indicator too of that what you have isn't quite what I need, right? And then we also ask, are you using the embedded AI applications? And last year, obviously, we saw like HiBob hit the top on that. We saw Workday's always been kind of in the top of that for the last couple of years. We've looked at it. Oracle started to increase in adoption, although they had a lot more people who were implementing. So you saw a lot of different players in the space. ADP, Cornerstone hit the top 5 in that one. iSub was at the bottom, and it wasn't a bad thing. What we had talked to them about, and they were very aware of this, is that the SMB market wasn't quite ready yet to sort of take full advantage. And they were also very concerned about they didn't have compliance on site. They didn't have a lot of capabilities on site. So what I really love about iSolve is they're very focused on listening to what their customers need and when they need it. And right now, we know that SMBs are now saying, okay, I've played a little bit with the AIs that are standalone, right? I know Claude. We know already about 80% of the market shifted over to Claude in the last year and a half from ChatGPT because it became a much more safe and structured way to use AI with a business model because they were able to sort of make those connections more carefully depending on who you're talking to. And so, iSolve first went for let's connect that. So that makes it easy for the small businesses. And then they came up with some AI agents that they felt were really focused on what their customers wanted. And when we talked to them about pricing, and we didn't get all the details, I think we're still kind of getting some of that involved. But their big focus here was that we're not going to just do this consumer-based consumption sort of pricing models. We're going to kind of build this into the PEPA model that small businesses are comfortable with so they can budget because they really need to budget. There will be an increase in price because you have to have an increase in price when you're doing some new things, but they're going to build it into a model that works for them. The other thing that I really liked when we got our briefing on this was that their new head of product and their new well, actually, no, it's their new CEO, I should say, because Pragya, who is their COO, and Kristen Rishi, who's been their head of product now for Kelly Rico. Sorry, Kelly.
Yes, no worries. She knows.
Yeah. Kelly, who's been their longtime product leader, they've really, I think, done a good job of really understanding what the customers are looking for and how they're connecting to that. The new CEO has a background
Last.
coming,
Yes.
yep, from working with a lot of other HRMS environments, big AI background. And so he's bringing his experience and they're bringing their experience. And what I like is that they're both listening to each other when you hear them talk about it. And both of them are really clear on the fact that they want to make sure that when they're talking about AI, they're not just talking about how it's being managed and how it's being talked about as a tool within the organization, but that you're also thinking about it as how it's being trained and how
Mhm.
the policies and compliance are being managed and how it's being audited and reviewed, and that HR has a big role in that space. Make sure that it's managed. I really liked where they were heading with that, and I think we'll hear a lot more.
Yeah, I also like you. You mentioned this, and it's for once again kind of the theme here. But you mentioned there's agents. There's 6 of them that they've released right now in general availability, and they're each accountable for an outcome. You mentioned the outcome based, and so here it goes again. So to give you, there's 6 of them. We won't go through all of them. They all have pretty cute names. But for instance, there's one called the Helper, and that is to do sort of the HR help desk, right? And so they're looking at, rather than just routing the tickets and figure out, if you put in your question, we figure out the right person. They literally try to answer the questions. They can see time save. They can see ticket resolving numbers, and you can get that specific outcome. Or one called the Advisor, which helps you with benefits enrollment. So you can look at enrollment completion and total number of employees served, right? And get a very specific outcome that you can actually see the value that these type of agents bring in, rather than just sort of a vague, hey, we got these cool new agents, do cool new stuff. Yes, that's nice. But like, what specifically is this value to me, especially as we start thinking more and more about the cost of token
Yeah.
usage?
So what I always liked about Kelly when we talked to Kelly, who's their product officer, chief product officer, is that she always, in every conversation, she always asks us about what are they trying to achieve, right? And that comes through in the AI conversations they're having right now. So yeah, all good stuff. Like I said, this is not. Nobody can put their head in the sand and say AI is not here, right? What we can do is have a real good conversation about what is it achieving and what do we want to give it access to, right?
That's a great point. It's kind of a compliance question, right? And when we talk
Is
about compliance, we want to talk about Brightmind, one of the big companies. Brightmind, you mentioned that Susan was at SHRM. They made a big announcement when they were there. And that's definitely a company that we know well. We've been working with them as they're trying to become a little more well-known in the space and doing some of the work. And one of the big ones they did was about, they're another one that, understand the kind of, I guess, the right questions to ask. And they really understand this age of AI. You really need to trust in the data that you have. And they're really trying to figure out a way to go beyond just, yeah, that's a nice saying, but what does that actually mean in the practical world? How do we create trust? And a lot of that is in transparency and in clarity and openness of what's going on. Specifically here, I think we're talking about compensation information, right? So making sure to have that layer of data coming from a number of different sources and seeing where that information comes from. That was a big announcement at SHRM. Any other insight? I know, like you said, neither of us were there, but we both work closely with Brightmind. Anything that you saw?
Yeah, we've worked with this group for a while, and I think what's really interesting about this one is that so they've been. What Brightmind does is they are compliance content. And the most important thing about, compliance content is one of the spaces being impacted heavily by AI right now, as we all know, because I think it feels like if I type into ChatGPT and I say, what's this next new compliance thing for this city or this state or this local region, like it's giving you the right answer. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it might be reading the front headline of a policy or of a regulation and not realize that it hasn't either been passed or it has different components to it. So one of the things that's really important when you're dealing with compliance data is that you are digging deep enough to understand what's really happening at the regulatory level and that you're connecting it to all the different ways that regulation has an impact on other things inside the organization. So Brightman, many of them might know the brand Expert HR. That was kind of where they originally were baked from. They were acquired by Relex, which is the parent company for LexisNexis. Many people know LexisNexis, which is a huge brand in legal compliance data. So they're just a huge data company that understands the power of correct data. It's the best way I could put it, of trusted data, right? And so what's really exciting is that they have created a partnership and really rolled out at the SHRM 2026 relationship with one of the large background checking firms. with the focus on taking sort of their highly structured look at variations of different roles inside organizations and some of the compliance around that with some of the payroll and background checking data that some of the background organization has, combining that and giving you a much more granular look at compensation data. Pay equity, which is really big. They have a big location out in the European market and UK. They're dealing with a lot of the challenges that those markets are dealing with on a pay equity conversation right now, even though that is being delayed by a lot of regulations who are still being held accountable to it from over time. Here in the United States, they are heavily focused on sort of pay as it relates to compliance and regulations and your pay benchmarking and salary ranges. Those are really tightly connected to what you can do by state and local region and taxes. And so I do think that this is a space where what we can see is the value of the data is in how well it is curated. And that is something I think we'll hear more and more about as we start to look at where AI is getting its data from and the impact of being able to trust that data. Over time, AI is going to have less open internet to just pull information from, even though there are government locations and sites where all that data is oftentimes held in public environments. It's not always updated very well. It's not always kept as neat as it should be. It's not always easy to access. And so as good as AI is, if it doesn't understand the nuances, doesn't understand how to really check things, it could oftentimes give you the wrong answer because of the way someone worded it or the way someone put it into a site or what's banners in front of it. And so we really have to think about sort of trusted and validated data. It's the same thing we talk about in our survey all the time, Cliff, right? Like, it makes a difference if you know who double checked this and you know where they got the data from and you know how they got the data, right?
Yeah. And I would say actually there's, another perspective that I've seen a lot too, which is that with the AI sort of world, they're generating answers based on, and if they find some incorrect data and they put an answer out there, that's now part of the broader data set in a lot of cases that now the next generation of AI is looking at, right? So it's perpetuating bad info. So it's, some people say, yeah, I looked and I saw there was a source, but then you look at that source and you've got to track it back. It's not much different than research has always been done, right?
Yeah.
Find the primary source, find that primary info. And like you said, sometimes even that primary info can be wrong, but the whole idea is open up that space, put some clarity, shine some light on there.
Yeah. And it's always wrong just if it didn't read it right? It does that all the time to our research, right? Like AI is just as fallible as human beings. Maybe do a little faster, but it can also get the wrong answer faster too, right?
Yeah.
So.
Very perceptive. Perceptics. Oh, as long as we're talking about perceptics. Mary Poppin is someone you've known for a very long time. I don't know if I've ever had a chance to meet her, but she has moved over to be the chief customer officer. She says she's going back to her roots as the chief customer officer now at Perceptics.
Yeah, Mary Poppin, one of all, I just loved her name, right? We used to laugh. It's like one of those names that you just can't forget, right? But I met her when she's customer officer over at SAP SuccessFactors. And she was just one of those people that really, there's a lot of times I meet tons of people in our industry, you and I both, right? And we're like, hey, we know we met him. We don't know where we met him. We try our best, we really do, but there's a lot of, just like anybody else, a lot of names and a lot of people. Mary stuck with me because she just had an energy about her and how much she cared about the customers and her sort of, that was early days. SuccessFactors was acquired by SAP. There was a lot of customer challenges because of the big company, little company challenges, right? Moving in that space. And she really, I think, had her arms around the pulse of what was happening in that organization. So I'm very excited to see her move into Perceptics. We know Perceptics has been sort of over the last couple of years kind of figuring out what its next step is in this market, right? It's a tough space. Like we said, is getting data and information on where people are at and what their feelings are and what they're doing. And so I'm excited. This is a great place for her. I think she stepped out a little bit. She was doing maybe sales, customers, technology, those kind of things. And now she's back in this space. We have a lot of other friends like Lisa Sterling who are over there at Perceptics and other friends. So we know they're continuing to invest in their leadership here. And I'm excited to see what she can do here. So I'm hoping we get a chance to get caught up with her soon. So
absolutely. Another leader that we've seen and has also been mentioned on the show a few times, Rachel Varder, most recently at UKG. Definitely made a big impact there. But she is now over at Epicor as their chief revenue officer. Pretty interesting. I mean, her pedigree as well, or her experience, I should say, whatever you want to think of it. Between UKG with the aforementioned SAP and Cisco, really in there on the tech side. Now, at Epicor as their chief revenue officer, just really interesting. This is a person who's definitely someone we've met and had a chance to talk to directly. Another what strikes me about her, at least on our sort of personal ones, is that she is kind of gets into the data, probably from having, such a strong, sort of tech background. When we would say things like, 16% of people are using the embedded AI platform. So like, let me see, break down who specifically at the company is using it that way. Are we seeing differences between, like, executives using it, people on the ground? Well, I don't know. Let me check. Are we seeing that? Is that a regional thing? What is it that's appealing to some and not to others? Like not just saying, okay, 60%, whatever that means. Like I've always been impressed with her sort of insights and the questions she asks. Sometimes that's just as important as the answers you give.
Yeah, I always liked Rachel. I had not met her until she was at UKG, so it was my first opportunity to get a chance to meet her. What I'm intrigued by this is, one, it shows Epicor is starting to increase its leadership role. Now, most people think of Epicor as just kind of an SMB, basically an ERP, right? Like that's finance and some supply chain and systems record, those kind of things. It does has a pretty stable HRMS. They did do a lot of partnerships with UKG back in the day as well. So I'm waiting to see sort of what that looks like. We still see a lot of people on Epicor in our data set, right? It's very small businesses, but it is interesting to see them start to stretch a little bit. And we have heard a lot about sort of their finance components. The finance space, one of the reasons we're capturing data on this is we think there's going to be a lot of shift here, right? We know Zoho is coming on strong with what they're doing kind of in their sales and going into finance and payroll. We are definitely seeing in our data set, organizations like NetSuite sort of shift its makeup and mix in a lot of the spaces, right? We're definitely seeing some new players come into this space. So I think this will be a space to watch, as we often say, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Which is how does the HR world connect up with these sort of mid-market SMB finance kind of organizations, right?
Yeah, it's also interesting because when I'm looking at Rachel's sort of trajectory, and another one we're seeing is really a shift towards understanding the frontline workers. Of course, during COVID, that's probably a term many of us hadn't used before. We probably just said, I don't know, blue collar or, like line workers or something like that. But frontline workers became
nothing like being retail in the middle of Christmas. You know exactly what it's like, or in the middle of COVID healthcare, right? The frontline is frontline. You are dealing with the public every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of Epicor's space, right? Manufacturing, distribution centers, supply chain sort of stuff. So that is something that UKG has heavily focused on, especially during Rachel's tenure. So she's kind of continuing that like space. And that's another area that's become quite hot, right? Is making sure you're servicing those frontline workers. I don't have a cute segue for this one, but another fun one.
Alex will forgive you.
Yeah, exactly. So Alexandros, who, in World Cup sort of, with the theme of the World Cup going on, it mostly goes by just his first name, I guess, to try and save us pronouncing a longer Greek name. But it's Alexandros Stratos. But even though on his LinkedIn, it's Alexandros S. Has left Workday and is now going to be at Fosway. I'll admit that I did not know Fosway as well, but, continues in the analyst role. Did you know Fosway?
Yeah, we know Fosway very well. Yeah, David over there, who Fosway is probably the largest European independent analyst firm outside of, and you've known them. You probably seen
I probably know the people without knowing the.
Yeah, you definitely know David. You definitely know Sven, the guys who are over there, right?
Okay.
They work internationally, but they also work in the United States. They do some great sort of charts on sort of where people play in the market too, like many of the other analyst firms in the space. I know Alex as well. So Alex was our analyst relations at Workday for many years. Particularly, he dealt with the CIO office, and he also was kind of headed up if we were doing the European Workday event. So he would basically help me out with hotels and make sure we were able to get to the locations. He made sure we had good reservations for meals, Alex. And we used to laugh at with Alex all the time because Alex was Greek. So he would make sure everything was taken care of. Like it was very much important to him that we were feeling like we were guests in his house whenever we went to the Barcelona or Stockholm or to Amsterdam. We've been to all of those for the Workday European conferences. He came from IDC though. So he was an analyst who then went to being an analyst relations, and he's going back to being an analyst for the Fosway team. We love David. We love the Fosway team. I'm very excited for Alex and for the Fosway team. So we're just a shout out and a congratulations to see someone that we were not, because a lot of times when people leave in their analyst relations roles, they go someplace else. We don't get to see him very often. So this means we'll get to see him on the road again still. So just a shout out and we're looking forward to seeing him on the road again. So
yeah, exactly. So, we've been talking a lot about people kind of leaving companies and going to new ones, a little something called flight risk. Well, wouldn't you just know it? PayScale just released a new report, the flight risk report. And this is an interesting, because we were just talking about analysts, right?
Yeah.
So you and I took a look at this, we've got the full report. And I would say this is one of those ones where you start to say, we all have a data set, right? We have a data set in front of us. What do we take from that? And that's why that's part of the analyst role. I sort of interpreted, and I think you did too, right? Some of the numbers and some of the data that came out of this report differently than, at least as far as the sort of official press release from PayScale, but it's still great research. It was so interesting to read. But what they were looking at specifically here is there are jobs wherein, after a number of years, the pay discrepancy between tenured employees, people who've been there for a little while, and new employees, when that discrepancy is really high, then people are more likely to leave the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
But and that's interesting, right? And I think that
and that's not surprising, right? If someone new comes in, they're making more money than you, right? Like there's real issues, and vice versa. If you're new and someone's making a lot of money, right? Like that's not surprising, but we always like to be validated on that, right?
Yeah. So they call it job hugging, right? Staying on to your job because you'll go more. So, the sort of analysis side, though, that I kind of took a little differently than they might have, is that Ruth Thomas, who's the chief compensation strategist at PayScale, said when I'm not doing the exact quote, but said, when employers can see where those gaps are, they can take steps to keep people from leaving by adjusting the compensation they're even. I don't know if that's exactly how most organizations would see it. They might just say, okay, when they leave, we'll just get new ones in for cheaper. I hate to be brutal about it. But also the jobs that have that tenure gap, I think that there's kind of reasons there. And you identified it right away, Stacey, when we were walking through it. So like, for instance, pulling up the number one gap where, there's a difference between a tenured employee and a new employee was massage therapist. 29% chance pay difference, or 29% pay difference between a tenured massage therapist and a non-tenured massage therapist, a brand new one. Then there's also respiratory technician, radiology technician, and events manager. So massage therapist, you and I both hit on this, right? What's the difference there? They have an existing customer base after a few years who are going to fill that. And then you pointed out one that I didn't think of for those other ones, like a respiratory technician, a radiology technician, is that requires specialized knowledge of the equipment, right? So
every hospital has some slightly different equipment in those spaces, right? So
yeah, it's not so simple. It's not easily transferable. And when you look at the ones that don't have that sort of tenure gap, there are things that I would believe are very transferable. Marketing analysts being the number one, where there's not that much of a pay difference. But yeah, that's something that sort of job hopping makes more sense in, right? It's almost better that way to bring in those knowledges and those connections that you already have.
Yeah, and we've seen some of this before. I think Josh Burson had done this thing, like, if you stayed in the same business unit or same company for a while, you saw, you reach the top faster for HR, some of those kind of data sets, right? What I would say is I think there's two ways to look at this. So job hopping I know for many of the younger customers, kind of loyalty to the company is not really a thing that we have anymore, right? You might have loyalty to people, to managers, to people who you feel have watched out for your career, but oftentimes loyalty to a company is just a really hard thing to build into anything right now. But you are looking at benefits. You are looking at, for many young people, job hopping gives them the opportunity to get a much higher raise much more quickly than staying in space. I think what Ruth and the team are really focusing on here is that don't devalue that pay equity conversation, and definitely look at it, because you could be losing really good both new employees or existing employees because you did not think about how either new or existing employees kind of matched up from a skill set perspective. Because it's really easy to not think about someone who's been here for 10 years and they really haven't gotten a big raise every couple of years. You got these new people coming in with much higher price points because they're requiring it, right? And vice versa. I've been here for 10 years. I've gotten quite a bit, I've grown with, every year because we've put some standard models in place, but the new people just don't feel like they can get there at a pace at which they want to. Those are really, really hard, I think, I think it's easy for a lot of companies who aren't looking at compensation on a more strategic level to forget that pay is the starting conversation. Benefits, whether you like your manager, all those things, you've got to get a baseline pay to make sure you even start to thinking about the other stuff, right?
Yeah, that is core concept of work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As much as we say we would do this if we won the lottery, I don't know how many of us would be in. I don't know how many of us would be running payroll for someone else in a multinational. I would be hanging out with you, but it would actually be in a hobbit hole, a real one.
Yes, we would figure out a way to do this in a much more fun environment than in our Zoom. And I'll tell you, because someone the other day said, "Well, I could either get this role or I could just win $1 million." And I said, "You get bored if you didn't have to do this, right?" And now, granted, we could be doing it in a lot more fun places. So that's, I think, the real goal.
Yeah, one fun place might be at one of the World Cup matches. I've been really enjoying that. And in the spirit of competition and, our hated rivals over at Red Dead site, not really. We love them. They've launched a new podcast, new HR tech podcast, not enough of those, called Workplace Stories. That's going to be looking at, I think they call it 600 seconds in HR tech, right?
Yeah.
Which will be, getting into these stories, especially when there's something sort of transformational happening at an organization, some new tech coming in, a new product, a big M&A thing.
Yeah.
You can imagine what a great story the Ultimate and Kronos merger would have been to cover in sort of a little more depth. And of course, this is Red Thread is Stacey Gar. If you don't know her, she is just great. And I think we've talked about it before. I think we did a whole podcast, you can probably find it, where we talked about the sort of inside baseball, as they say, plays out in the analyst world, and that all of us kind of do different things. So we're not really competitive in that sense. I mean, certainly all of us want to provide the best value we can and, and get all the work we can, but most of us focus on sort of different aspects. We all try and elevate each other up. So although I sort of jokingly said it's a big rivalry, it's really not. I have the ultimate respect for Stacia, and I think she's
Stacey
go listen.
Yeah, Stacia texted me this week. She wanted me to take a look at something. And I said, "Oh, I'm on vacation." She goes, "Oh, nothing is worth taking off your vacation." And so right. So we, I think we're all good friends in this. And I'm actually excited to see her do this because I think, there's been this conversation about the value, the impact of podcast. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm still listening to them every day. That's what when I go to clean, when I go to drive, when I've got anything where I want to multitask, my podcast come out without any challenge. And I know it's this place where a lot of people get their information. I think the other thing that's really important, one, we should probably mention it isn't just Stacia, it's Danny Johnson too. Danny is her co-founder with her. And Danny does a lot more in the learning space. And so I'm sure this is going to be interesting because you're going to see the entire HR talent. And she has a lot. They do one of probably the largest reports on BI and analytics. The other thing that's coming up is they do an event that they're running. I think they're starting to get signups for it. It's coming up very soon. It's a really great sort of in-depth conference. I think they're calling it Elevate. I could be wrong.
Well, it's up in the mountains, so I'm
yeah. And I just think, one, if you're looking for something where you can have some real conversation about how things are working, actually do a little brainstorming with other CIOs, CFOs, and more importantly, CHROs, this might be a place. And some of the product people inside of these organizations from a vendor perspective, this might be the place to get a chance to do that. So, there's all kinds of events, all kinds of conferences. We support all of it. And we love to see people sort of bring out more information because I think that's the real challenge we're seeing in the market right now, right? Is that as much as we are all talking about it, getting the real depth you need to make your decisions is really hard. So my last comment will be, all right, on that note, make sure you take the survey. Right?
Yeah, no, well, actually, you were setting me up. I thought you were going to do the segue because you mentioned there are a lot of events and you should go take the survey. I agree. But if you want to get the live version of this podcast where you just discuss tech news with us or just anything really, you can find us at a few events. By the time you hear this, you may have missed, Stacey. I'm not sure if there's still going to be time for you to.
I don't know that I'm going to be in Sunrise, Florida anymore. I think that we're going to be in Massachusetts up at the UKG headquarters location. So that's one thing. So that will be June 24th. I'll be doing a payroll sort of brainstorming session with the team. So I'm very excited about that. And then you're going to be out in Minneapolis, right? On July 14th through 17th?
Yeah, that'll be for the Learn event. That's, I don't know, I'll just say it, LEHRN. It's like Learn, both HR in the middle. I'll be there. It's actually July 12th is when I'll actually get out there. That's Sunday. That will be in Minneapolis, as you said. We'll be doing some work there, I believe, with Paylocity, presenting some information. Then we've got a little bit of a break. At least unless there's anything I'm forgetting about. Probably the next time I'll be on the road will be in late September, the 21st, 24th for OC Tanner's conference. Another one that's almost always in the mountains. This time will be in Black Desert, Utah. Still a very beautiful area. And of course, as we get closer to HR tech season, it'll be like it just was.
We'll be in a lot of other places. Yeah. Probably the biggest one is that if you are looking at trying to catch up with us, I will be keynoting the Cornerstone Connection event in Chicago on October 6th. I'm very excited about that. We're going to be talking a lot about what they're doing with their new workforce intelligence layer and how that's sort of fitting into the bigger picture of both learning and taking care of your AI agents. We'll probably also be at the Workday Rising event, which will be right before the HR Tech Conference. I think we're going to be at the Dayforce event, which is like right after the HR Tech Conference. I'm pretty sure UKG's got something going on, and I know SAP SuccessFactors got something going on, and I think Oracle. So we're going to have all of them at some point in that whole mix, and there will be a lot of others.
Yeah.
I think that will be there too.
We'll
So.
get an apartment in Vegas and I'll be fully miserable. But we danced around it. But I'm pretty sure we'll be at HR Tech, of course.
Yeah.
That is always the premier event. That's when we'll debut all of the information that you put into this survey. Go check the survey. And that will be the big keynote, the mega event. Stacey will be doing.
We do have our mega session out now. So that will be on Wednesday, which is the first day of the actual conference, although Tuesday is when they're going to have Women HR Tech, and we will be doing a session there for their intensives where we'll be training some new HR technology sessions. Will be more like workshops, but our actual keynote session that we've been doing for quite some time is definitely going to be on Wednesday. It's going to be the afternoon mega session keynote. So be sure to sign up for that if you want to make sure you're there. I do think that there's limited space as always in those rooms. And because we're in the middle of the first day, that will give you an opportunity to go the next day to see all the vendors who are mentioned. So
yeah, so that will be exciting. We can't wait to see you in person. It's always a big treat to get to see and meet all of you, and really looking forward to it. Well, Stacey, that wasn't, like I said, it wasn't as crazy as some of these are. We had a lot of cool people moves, a lot of focusing on outcomes, which we love to see. Anything else you want to leave the people with besides one last?
Please take the survey.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we will say that if you are looking to go to the HR Tech Conference, I think we're going to have a QR code where we'll have a link with our name on it at the bottom, and we'll add it to this session's summary page. I think it's like 20 or 30% off or something like that. So it's well worth sort of taking advantage of that. And I also want to note that if you do participate in the survey, you will get the full report the week of October 31st or the week after that. I think we're kind of balancing where all that's going to fall because of all the other events. So we're very excited about our dates around that. But that's it, Cliff. I think we have spent our summer day here with everyone. I hope all of you are out enjoying yourselves. And by the time you're listening to this, you are planning some vacation for yourself. If you do want to get some details on what is in this year's annual HR Systems Survey, one of the things we'll also be starting probably in the next couple of weeks is a buy one, get one. So if you buy this year, you'll get next year. So if you do miss participating in it, and you still want to have access to it, that will probably come out the 1st of July. And so you'll have access to both of them at the same time. And that is it for this week. Cliff, anything else before we wrap?
Yeah, I just realized when this comes out, the day this comes out will be Thursday. That is you'll hear this. And then that night, 10 p.m. Eastern time, will be the last U.S. game for this stage of the World Cup. So go USA.
Yeah.
Probably the only time you hear me say that.
Let's cross our fingers for everyone there, right? Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Well, as we wrap today, just a reminder for everyone that if you do want to get more details like this and get all of the updates on where we'll be at, please go to our website and sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on our research launches, where we'll be speaking or visiting, and when you can participate in the annual survey. That is the best way to get that information if you don't want to wait to the very end of our podcast. Be sure to listen to all of our other podcasts, HR Huddle podcast, our Pivot Effect, as well as Sure We Have a Problem. And Cliff, you're going to be getting, I think, some updated podcasts from on the ground at events, right?
Yes. We're still, you know what? I'm going to put out a call out to you listeners, to our audience there. Trying to think of a cool name. So what we really want to do is, we have our voice of the customer research we've mentioned a few times, where all of you put in your information. And we've had these other ones where we're conversing with executives. But I was thinking it would be fun to, when I'm at these events and we're meeting you guys live, let's have you on the podcast. Let's do a voice of the customer live. So might call it voice of the customer, might call it face of the customer, since it's going to be a video podcast, something like that. Tell us what you think would be a good name for it. But that's what we want to do. Let's hear it from those frontliners. Let's hear it from the people doing this work. You tell us in the survey what you think of these systems, how many different systems you have. Are you having integration issues? We don't talk about implementation a lot, but that's a huge issue. When I was at the Prism event, one of the biggest cheers that went up was when they said, now you'll be able to see all the anomalies from payroll all in one place rather than going through each one individually. And the crowd went nuts as if they had just announced that, Beyonce was coming out to sing. I was like, wow, okay, that's what they really care about. Like, this is really what matters. All this cool global stuff. They're like, wow, okay, because those are the issues that really matter to you. And I want to be able to capture that So when I'm at these events, we're on the road anyway. We love talking to people. So that will be the next one.
Yep. So if you want to get a little bit of a in opportunity to be on camera, look up Cliff. He'll be doing man on the street kind of stuff. Anyways, to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and to get all behind the scenes content, you can also follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and Instagram. And then also, as usual, Cliff, thanks for doing this on the weekend. I do appreciate it, giving me an opportunity to spend some time with my kids this week. And thank you to all of the people who help us put this into production, Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce it podcast with their amazing founder, Kelly, our marketing team, Summer Alano, Caitlin Diamond, Cole Harris, Linda Galloway, Kelly Kuhn. We got a whole team now behind all of this, so we do really appreciate all your hard work in doing this. Thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. And Cliff, that is it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in just 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates. Thanks, everyone.